And in about 3 years, I'll be back. So, all right, miniatures. Let me play into one of the things that Tom was talking about with, the challenge coming up. A miniature is just a small scale version of another object, okay? And I really wrestled with that statement because is it possible to have a miniature something that there isn't a larger version of it out there? And I couldn't come up with anything. You figure you got minivans. Well, they're smaller versions of a big van. You have mini bagels, mini donuts, even mini driver, right? You figure, all right, this is a person, but her real name's Minerva, so if you shorten it, you get mini. But there's no real hard set rule that says a miniature has to be a particular size. You can see things, like you say, with the minivan, right, where you have this big ass van and then you have one that's a little bit smaller. You can still fit 8 people in most of them. So they're not that small. So what should be your determining factor when you're deciding to make miniatures as to how big it should be is what's its intended purpose. If you're just making something small to sit on a shelf and, look kind of cool, it could be this big, it could be this big, it could be whatever size you want it to be. So with the challenge, keep that in mind. Don't feel like you have to make something microscopic. In fact, one of the things you'll notice with the pieces that I have here, I don't go real small. And I'll explain that in a minute. So if you're making if you're making something for a different purpose, in fact, if you'd be so kind to start passing those around. If you're making something for a particular purpose, like for example, to be part of a train display or dollhouse furniture, nail scale comes into play because you're now making something that's going to sit alongside of other items that are at a particular scale. So you don't want, like if you have a little hutch inside a dollhouse furniture that's got, little pieces on top of it, you don't suddenly want a bowl that's this big. So, usually things like train displays, dollhouses are built at a particular scale. So you're going to want to get familiar with those scales and try to work within the confines of that scale. That said, if I ask each one of you to bring in a bowl that you've turned, and we line them up on the back shelf back there, they're not all going to be the same size. Mark Anderson makes bowls this big, right? I might bring in bowls this big, who knows? But an average bowl might be, say, 8 or 9 inches in diameter, but there's no rule that says it has to be a particular size. So same with miniatures. You don't have to stay real strict with it's got to be this big or whatever, but keeping it within a guideline of it. In the handouts that are going around, the main thing that I have on there are 2 tables. One that shows the size of train scales, and just to give you a guideline of how big those things are, I have no interest in turning things for train scales. Train sets, you go buy the stuff you want, but in general, there's nothing cool like a bowl on a train display. Most of the stuff I do is dollhouse furniture sized. And I have a bunch of scales listed there. And again, it's for reference. The 1/6 scale is Barbie doll size. And every once in a while, you'll see doll houses that are like this big, and they're like 3 levels, and the floors are like this high for Barbie dolls. So those, again, I don't typically see a lot of ornamental things like bowls and stuff like that in there because it's just like a couch, a chair, and a Barbie doll. The 1/12 scale is the scale that I tend to work with the most. Then you'll notice there's 1/24, 1/48, and you'll notice they go in increments of 12, right? And there's a reason for that. So let's start looking at the 1/12 scale, because like I say, that's the one I use the most. The reason it's 1/12 is because 1 inch equals a foot. So a foot's divided into 12, so it makes the math really, really easy, right? So something that's this big normally would be this big in that scale. So something that's 6 inches normally would be 1/2 inch in the reduced scale. And something that's 3 inches would be 1/4 of an inch. 1.5 inches would be 1/8 of an inch, and right on down the line. So the reason why I like to work at 1/12 scale, aside from the fact that that math is so easy, is because I feel it's the smallest scale that you can still accurately get detail in. You get much smaller than that, and it gets tough. And like I say, if you see people turn these little goblets like this big, it's really, really hard getting fine detail on there because we're working with wood. The grain of wood has limitations. You know, and the reason why I put this stuff up here, by the way, I have not been back for a show and tell in quite a while, so that's why I brought so much stuff. I want to do some show and tell. But if you look at this, many of the things I turn are rather delicate. If I try to reduce that by, 12, it's not going to happen. The grain fibers aren't that big, right? So to try and go smaller than that really does have limitations. And like I say, I like to do things that have a lot of detail. So if I try to make that and reproduce it that small, it's not going to happen. This piece right here, this was my attempt to take one of Cindy Drozda's pieces and reproduce it. Well, anybody who's familiar with Cindy Drozda, yeah, this would be fat in her world, right? So to try and go any thinner like she does, you just can't do it accurately at that scale. But I'm going to pass a lot of these things around. Some of the more delicate ones, you can come up here and look at it. So more important than scale in my mind is proportion. So what the proportion means is if I take, for example, this bowl. Now this would be typical of the kind of bowl that I typically turn. So it's about 8 or 9 inches in diameter and about 4 inches tall. And the wall thickness is a little less than 1/4 of an inch. I don't tend to turn thick wall thicknesses. I like them thin. I like when you go through here that it's the same all the way through the depth of it. And when I do my miniatures, if you see a picture of one of my miniatures, I don't want it to be obvious that it's a miniature. Unless there's something there next to it that tells you how big it is, it should look just like this, only smaller, right? So what you'll see here is, if I was to do that at, say, the 1/6 scale, it'd be about that size. And here it is done at the 1/12 scale. And I'll pass this guy around, and you can see the wall thickness on this, maybe a 32nd of an inch. If, when you're turning these things, if you don't get that kind of thinness, if you do the math afterwards and figure out what that scale would come out to, a lot of people when they do miniatures, they'll turn something this size, but the wall thickness will be like, 3/32 of an inch thick. Yeah, look at that table and look at how big that actually is. When a bowl this size, it'll have a wall thickness like this big. So try to keep that in mind as you're going. One of the cool parts with turning miniatures is you're starting with little scrap materials. If you mess up, you didn't waste a lot of material here. You can do another one. It doesn't take very long either, which leads into one of my points. I'll start passing some stuff around. So one of my points with the miniatures, and by the way, I have to tell you, being an ex-officer, I'm still on the mailing list. I get to see stuff. I saw the survey they did on the club of what you're interested in seeing demos on, and miniatures was at the bottom of the list. So I realized I had my work cut out for me here to try and sell you on this. But anyway, so the cool parts about doing miniatures is, number one, it's pretty quick. It doesn't take a long time to turn a miniature. Number two, you got more material than you could ever use in a lifetime. One pen blank, you could probably get 7 or 8 miniatures out of. The wood, when you're turning and you trim the edges around it before you put it on the lathe, you got enough wood there, you could do 20 or 30 of them. You can get a piece of 1x2, and this long you can get 20 miniatures out of it. I used to get the burls when some of the guys in here used to turn the really beautiful pieces out of the burls. I'd get them to give me their pieces that they cut off. And again, I had a lifetime supply of it. I had to start throwing it away because I just had too much. So like I say, it's rather cheap, it's rather quick, it's easy. The wow factor of miniatures is a big deal. I mean, you saw people coming in here, they're coming up and they're looking at my stuff saying, oh, this is so cool, this is so cool. I've gone to so many wood turning shows and walked up to some of the best wood turners in the world. David Ellsworth, Cindy Drozda, Mike Mahoney, show them my miniatures and they're like, wow, this is, that's kind of cool. And, show it to kids, show it to people who know nothing about wood turning, and it kind of impresses them. So take the time and do it. It doesn't make a big mess. It's worth a shot. And you might find that you like it. I have a couple of friends who do this stuff in their kitchen. They have little tiny lathes they bring out of the closet, set it on the kitchen table, they turn a miniature, it takes 5 seconds to clean up afterwards. So it's worth it. All right, so now getting into the next part, the tools and the mounting. So you'll notice I have a bunch of different stuff up here. So there's lots of ways to mount the items onto the lathe. What I discourage is using one of these things, okay? The reason why, you could I've seen people turn miniatures where they'll mount a blank like this in there, and they'll start out like 2 inch in diameter, and they'll start turning, and they'll whittle it down to the point where they're making a little tiny miniature on the end. Well, you wasted a lot of material doing that. You also have no control over what you're turning, because we all know from turning, as you start cutting away at the wood, sometimes what's in the center is a surprise, right? If I'm going to make something that's this big, I want my best grain represented in that area. I don't want to take a chance that as I'm cutting this, that there's going to be good grain in that center. So like I said, I really don't like doing that for that reason. The other reason I don't like doing that is we all know when you're turning large items, you have to turn the speed of the lathe down because of the rotational factor. And as you get smaller, like you're making a pen, you want to turn that speed up. Well, if I'm turning something that's only 1/4 inch in diameter, I want my lathe about as high as I can get it to go. This thing, meanwhile, should not be spinning at that kind of speed. And you're working on this little tiny thing. Next thing you know, you hit the back of your hand on these jaws and you ripped your hand apart. So I don't like using this. If you do want to use it, you'll notice one of the things I have here is a smaller waste block that can go in there. And now you can work out here on this and try to get your hands away from here. The other thing I recommend, if you do decide to do that, wrap tape around this so that and leave like flaps on it. So if your hand does get near it, those flaps will hit your hand before the jaws do, and you'll back away real fast. So, like I say, that's one option. Better option, I'll point this out. Some of you might have seen these, the little micro chucks. They're a little bit better because you don't have the big jaws on it, but it's still something that's 3 or 4 inches in diameter that's spinning at that high speed. I do use this occasionally, but I usually work with longer pieces to keep myself away from this. What I prefer instead is things that thread directly onto the spindle. So here's one option. You can buy nuts that'll thread right onto it, and you can make a waste block like this and embed the nut into here, and then you can thread the thing on. But my preference, I don't have to take that one off, got more. My preference are things like this. And again, we'll start passing these things around. Again, one over here, start over here. So what I do is I take Beal sells these guys, and all they are is a tap, but you can get them in the size to fit your lathe. This one is for like the Jet Mini, that's the 1x8. This one is the 1 1/4 by 8, and 8 is the threads per inch, and the 1 or 1 1/4 is the diameter. They're about, I think, $30 each. I think the club should own a set of these for this kind of purpose. And by the time I'm done here, I think you'll agree with me. I use those for all kinds of stuff. I guess I didn't bring them. But I make various sizes for things like jam chucks, right? Like if you're turning a goblet or something, you want to be inverted and have something to put up against it, I'll turn jam chucks and thread it. All you're out is the cost of the piece of the hardwood. And I'll make, like I say, I have probably 7 or 8 of them here tonight. I have so many of them at home in different sizes and shapes, and I'll use them for all kinds of things. I don't like using faceplate, faceplates, the kind of thread on here and then screw into it. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a piece of hardwood about this big, thread it, put it on there, use like double stick tape, put up against it, put the thing on. What's really nice about it is now as you're cutting, you treat it as a waste block. You can cut into that wood and you're not going to hit screws. You're not going to hit, the faceplate itself. And faceplates are expensive. Again, this is relatively cheap. So you'll notice with this guy and with the ones I'm passing around, it's two-part. So the part here is, in this case, oak. And then I'll take a piece of something that's easier to come by, a piece of maple, a piece of cherry or something like that. And I'll glue that onto here, and then I'll cut the face of it off. And you'll notice I kind of tapered down at an angle. So this part out here, I typically want to be about 1 inch to 3/4 of an inch in diameter. So now what I'll do, I'll take like this. I use a lot of super glue. So I'll put the super glue on. Now I've got to do my shuffle. And try to center it as best I can. Oops. I normally put a piece of paper towel underneath it there. But this isn't my lathe, so I don't have to worry about it.
Push it up, push it up. Push it up.
Wrong way? Gotcha. Okay. So I like to let the glue kind of run around it so that I get a good coat all the way around. And then I'll hit it with the accelerator and let it go, ideally like 10 or 15 minutes to let it cure all the way through because, as you all probably know, accelerator works from the outside and gradually makes its way in. If you start turning this too fast, it might feel like it's dry out here, but it's still... Pardon?
What do you actually do with these?
Okay. This is going to be the piece I'm going to turn the miniatures from.
Right.
You're right. I forgot to say that. I apologize. So, yeah, this is actually going to be my spindle or my blank that I'm turning from.
And the glue is doing what?
So I glued, in fact, at this point...
You glued that to your end,
Right.
but then you sprayed it.
Right. So I glued it and then I hit it with the accelerator just to speed up the drying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, like I say, the intent here is to have that secured onto here. And like I say, there's no chuck involved now, right? I'm held here. And as you can see, as I'm turning, there's nothing to hit my hands on. So I deliberately jumped to that part for now because now while that's going, we can talk about the tools. Another part I want to mention is grain orientation. So when you're turning bowls, you usually want faceplate or face grain that you're turning on, right? So you would cut your wood accordingly. You could make it so that, when you glue it on here, your grain is going side to side, and then you're working with face grain. If you're turning spindles, then you would want the grain to go this way. I wasn't paying attention when I put this on here because I grabbed a piece that has the grain going this way. So we're going to turn something with that in mind. It won't really matter. All right, let that dry a bit. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast?
So why did you, out of all the things in the turning world, why miniatures?
Okay.
What sparked that?
I'll be honest. I skipped over my normal intro stuff because I didn't want to hold you guys up too much. I got into miniatures by accident. It started out, my wife moved into a little cubicle, and I wanted to give her something that she could display in her cubicle, but I didn't want to give her something real big. So the first thing I made was this guy right here. At the time, I was making a lot of goblets, and I thought, maybe I'll just make her a smaller goblet. And I made it, and I really thought it was cool. Come out, and again, it has all that detail that my bigger ones had, but yet it was smaller. I'm like, that's kind of cool. I wonder if I can make a smaller one. So I made one half that size, and it still had all the detail. Made another one half that size, and half that size, and so I went. And a couple hours later, I made about 6 of them, right down to one that was about this high, including the captive ring, and it was completely hollow in the whole bit. And I'm like, this is kind of cool. So at the time, I was a member of the Turning and Talking discussion group on Yahoo. So I took a picture of it and I put it up on there. And somebody immediately fired back at me and said, that's not a miniature. A miniature has to be 1/12 scale, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I don't speak to that woman anymore. But yeah, so I started researching miniatures and I started getting into it. And again, I found when I showed these things to people, they went like, wow, that's really awesome. So I kind of like the idea. And like I say, it doesn't take a lot of time. One of the other things about turning miniatures that really helped me is it develops your skills. Most turners turn pens, they turn bowls. They don't do a lot of spindle work. And when they do, they struggle with it. Like the beads and the coves are kind of challenging, right? Well, you do miniatures and you become very good at doing that fine detail kind of stuff. And that's why I brought these guys here. So, you know, like when you look at this, you know, you can see the details in the beads, you know, and that takes me maybe 20 minutes. You know, you do it enough, you get fairly good at it, you know. And as you'll see, I'm going to keep 2 pieces out. And otherwise, we can pass this around. Let's start at this side this time. So the reason, this is not my bowl, okay? I believe Ron made this bowl. We were looking for something that we could put them in, right? So you're welcome to touch them and handle them. There's one little tiny spindle in there. I'd appreciate if that doesn't get broken. But yeah, you'll get an idea about like with the miniatures. Yes?
What woods do you like? I mean, you're showing a couple of different woods and pieces you just had. So which woods do you like and convert to which woods?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good point. One of the things that becomes a factor when you're working with fine anything, whether it's this kind of stuff or whether it's something really small, it has to be a very fine-grained wood. I would not try using oak, for example, or hickory. You're not going to have any luck turning anything, you know, delicate like that. I do a lot with maple. I do a lot with cherry, rosewood, any kind of rosewood. Cocobolo, ebony, Hearn's hardwood. Yeah. Hearn's hardwood has boxes of these things, and they're essentially pen blanks, but they're 6-inch, I guess they're mock ebony, but they turn like butter, and that's what you'll see like here. And they cut very, very clean. In fact, that little tiny spindle I was talking about in there is cut from a piece of this. But these are, I think, $6 a piece, which really isn't cheap, but affordable. But yeah, mostly I work with free wood.
But you need special tools.
That's the next step we're going to get into. No, not really. So if I was a miniaturist and I started out as a miniaturist, I would probably buy tools that are designed to be used by a miniaturist. But because I'm primarily a full-size wood turner, I tend to use the tools that I use for my full-size work. I do have some smaller versions, and I'll get into that in a minute. But in general, I also, when I'm doing my full-size work, I frequently use the tools that I use for doing miniatures. And it's one of the points I want to stress. Turning miniatures has made me a better full-size turner, and the detail that I do in the full-size turning has made me a better miniaturist. So, like I say, it's that give and take of working with the fine detailed items. when I start to turn this, you're going to notice I could use a roughing gouge. I have one this size that I really don't use that often. But if I wanted to use a roughing gouge as a roughing gouge, this is a good way to go. Half the time, if I really need it, I'll just grab my normal 3/4 inch roughing gouge and I'll use it. A lot of times as I'm shaping and doing detail work, this is one of my favorite tools, and I'll do most of it with this guy. This is, I guess, what, a 1/2 inch spindle gouge. When I need to get a little bit finer than that, then I fall down to these two guys. So this is the Cindy Drozda Special. She sells this, she sells a lot of them, and I use it a lot. What I don't like about it is it's too long. When I'm doing detail work, I tend to like shorter tools. Otherwise, I mean, I love this tool, but I find myself, when I'm holding it like this, not back here. So at the show in Lancaster last year, Avelino, is that his name? Samuels? Yeah. He was selling these things, and I was lucky enough to buy the last one he had there. I use this tool a lot. Unfortunately, he lives in St. John, and his area was hit by the hurricane, and I've emailed him numerous times saying, are you back to making these things again? And he's like, nah, I still don't have power yet. So I think he finally got power like a year later, but every time I email him, he's not very good about responding. And he still hasn't been reproducing, making them anymore, but it's a nice tool. And again, I can pass some of this stuff around. Pardon? Oh, so this is, yeah, we could pass it around. I'll need it when I start turning, but I might even be able to get away without it. Yeah. So it's basically a 1/4 inch detail gouge. Now, does he? So I rarely endorse anything with the name Sorby on it, because I think Sorby is short for exorbitant. I think that they just gouge you for price on anything they make. In fact, a lot of the stuff they sell, you can buy with other name brands on it for a lot less. I've never been able to actually prove that, but I like this a lot. This is what they call their micro gouge, and it's got 2 Phillips head Allen head screws in here, so you can loosen it and take this out. And they have a bunch of different accessories that you can put in here. So, this one here you'll see, and here's a bit, or
Who makes that?
this is Sorby.
It is a sword.
It is Sorby, yeah. Pardon? I'm not sure. Yeah. But like I say, it's hard to find good small tools. So I tend to make my own a lot. One of the things I've done is, here's a 1/4 inch spindle gouge or detail gouge from Penn State Industries. I think it was like $12. And really, not a big difference. What I would do with this is knock the handle off of it and either make a new handle like that one, or get one of these kind of things. One of the other things I'm notorious for, I took, a full-size tool about this size. I cut this part off of it and just stuck a tool in there, because it's like, what else am I going to do with this thing? But I like tools that are smaller. I like them to fit in your hand. If I'm turning a bowl, full-size bowl, I want a long handle because I want to be able to get back and do this stuff. If I'm doing close-up spindle work, I don't want a handle hitting me in the chest as I'm working. So a lot of times I'll cut the handles off of my tools and make them shorter. This one I find to be not bad. It's not as long as, the ones that are like this long. I can deal with this one. So some of the other ones, let's see, keep these, I'll hand these around. So we can start in the middle. Start in the middle. So what I typically do is I take Allen wrenches and I'll make things out of there. I'm not one for heating things up, making them soft, changing the shape of them, quenching it again to make them hard again. I find there isn't a piece of metal out there that you can't cut with a Dremel and you can't shape on a grinder. So I don't waste a lot of time on it. Allen wrenches are some of the hardest steels that we're going to deal with, and you're turning wood. You know, it really doesn't have to be that hard. So what I'll typically do with the pieces you see coming around there is I will take, I lost it. So I'll take an Allen wrench and I'll cut it off just past the bend. Now, one of the things I want you to notice on the pieces you're sending around there is there are two that are shaped kind of like this, you know, where it's got the L shape. Notice that one of them has a gradual bend and the other one has a very sharp bend. Avoid the ones with the really sharp bend. Look for the Allen wrenches that have that nice gradual, the bigger that arc, the better. And what will happen is, like I say, I cut it off just past that bend, and then I turn a flat on it, and then I just shape it on the grinder. And when I do that, you know, this is my favorite one here. That's why I'm not passing this one around. I get a nice, essentially, scraper, right? And you'll notice when I go to turn a bowl in here, I can lay this on my tool rest and work from the side here, and I can hollow out the inside of that bowl very easily with that. And you'll notice I have them in all kinds of sizes. If you go to a real hardware store and tell them you want Allen wrenches, but you don't care the exact size, they'll go back and they'll pick up a bin or a box and set it down and say, help yourself. Because what happens is, if you go into the really old hardware stores, they had drawers with all these different sizes in there, and they're constantly dropping them on the floor. You know, they'll go to take some out, they drop it. They don't have time to sit there and figure out what size it is and put it back again, so they'll just throw it into a box. And usually they'll give them away for really, really cheap. And you're just looking for a general size, you're not looking for an exact size. So yeah, like I say, I tend to use these. I do, here's another one we can pass around. So like I say, I'll cut whatever I need. You know, I'll just kind of make it up. Other people also use these, the dental picks. You can go, if you talk to your dentist and say, what do you do with your old dental picks when you're done with them? You may have to wait 6 months, but the odds are they're going to be willing to either give it to you. I don't think they'll sell it to you, but you can get them fairly cheap. At the woodworking show, the guys that have the bins in the back where they're selling the various tools, I think that's where I bought this one at. I don't use these. What I do use, Home Depot and places will sell these sets of picks, and you'll get like 4 of them for like $7. And they're cheap little plastic handles, which, I mean, if you're smart, you'll knock these off and put a wooden handle on. But I use them like this. But again, I'll pass this guy around. You can see I basically just flatten it and shape it like I do the other guys. And suddenly I have a gooseneck hollower, you know, and it didn't cost a lot of money. And I use this tool a lot. Your turn again.
Mizzy wheel?
Pardon?
Ever use Mizzy wheels making these tools?
Never heard of it.
Look it up.
Okay.
Absolutely fantastic.
What do they make?
For drum. They make little cutting wheels.
Oh, okay.
That you can shape.
The wheels itself.
They don't heat up.
Gotcha.
It's real good, you know, they're like magic.
Well, you'll see. Why don't I do one now? So what I do I was in the middle of putting a new head on here. What I do with it? Metal. I love this setup for the Dremel, these quick change wheels. Those little, I guess they were Emery wheels that were popular, 10 or 15 years ago. I hate them. They always break on you and they're a pain. Grumble, grumble, complain. I don't even think the microphone's picking me up. I think it's just me being loud. Put on my name tag? All right. So, right here, I'm going to work. I'm going to cut this. So I have my safety goggles on. So like I said, I just cut it off past the bend.
Put it on the board.
Oh, sure. This will be easier. Now I'm going to go down to the grinder. By the way, while I'm down here, many of you have noticed this. I don't use this. I built one because friends of mine that I mentioned who do the miniature stuff don't have the big fancy Wolverine type thing, and they were saying, well, how can I sharpen my tools? So I made them a miniature version of the Wolverine, and it works. It, got all the features. The coolest part, and in the packet of stuff that I passed around, are the plans for making these. These I use all the time. So, for example, grumble, grumble, complain. I have them, like this one's a 1/4-inch hole. This one I use much more often. I think it's a 5/16 or 3/8 inch hole. And you can put the 1/4-inch stuff in there. Let me use this one. And it's basically the same thing as this, just on a much smaller scale. And I use that for shaping and sharpening all my little small tools. What I did do, you'll notice I drilled a hole here. And it's just a slight modification on my Wolverine thing. The reason why, so now this is going to be a challenge because I usually work the other way. So now I rest this point in that hole, and that allows me to do the pivot. Where if I try to go into this pocket, sometimes it hangs up on this piece. You may not need that, but I just find it pivots smoother in that hole. But like I say, so I can sharpen these kind of tools that way. Back to this guy. So determine whether you're going to use it as I'll call it a right-handed or a left-handed tool. What I'll do for some items, I like to actually have a reverse tool so that let's say I'm going around there is that little English top hat where it has that rolled rim. So with the one that's cut in the other direction, I can actually use that to shape, going in the opposite direction. So I have some, like I say, that go this way so I can hollow on the front side, and this one I can hollow on the back side. And again, it's just an Allen wrench. I mean, you know, no big deal. So like I say, in general, I would take this guy. I'm going to come over here now. And I'm going to turn my back to you because I have to. Actually, while you're getting set up, give me a second. Okay, you good? Yes, sir. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind the flat on the top of it. And we all know you should never use the side of the wheel. Okay, so can you see that? There you are. Ouch. All right, so you can see where you get the general idea. All right, so like I say, it's just flat, and I'm going to pass it around in a few minutes. So now, I just kind of freehand it, and I put a bevel on the front of the nose, and I try to do like a 15-degree bevel. And I try to knock the bottom edge off, the corner off of it, because if I don't, that can hang up when you're hollowing small items. Keep my finger away this time. There we go. So you can see the shape on it. And again, I'm going to just pass it around, so it's no big deal. But 2 minutes, right? It doesn't take very long. I then take and I pretend I just turned this, right? So I just make a handle. I like to make ones that fit in my hand comfortably. Drill a hole in it, you know, and drill the thing in. The hole I have here isn't sized for these, but again, you could turn a dozen of these ahead of time, have them laying around, and then when you make these things, you just super glue them in, and you got your tool. So.
How long do they hold it in?
So the cool part with it is, number one, because they really cost nothing to make, you can knock out, you know, 5 or 6 of them at a shot for $1, right? So I have more of them than I could ever need. And when I get them made, they'll stay sharp for years. I mean, it depends on how often you're using it. But what makes a tool dull? If you're turning a full-size bowl and this thing is turning at, say, 1,000 RPMs, and you're putting that edge on it, by the end of like 10, 15 minutes, that thing has gone across probably a couple miles of contact with the wood, right? But with these guys, you're turning something this big around. It's going to take you forever to wear that edge down, and you're working on pretty soft wood, so it's really not a big deal. I mean, they do tend to stay sharp for quite a while. You could also use something like this, or this, you know, the sharpening stones, the diamond sharpeners. And what I would do is just go across the top of it. You know, you don't have to try and touch up the side profile on it. But periodically, I will take them back on this on the grinder and resharpen them on there. But you'll find, I mean, you saw how fast what I was doing, how fast that wore away. Another thing you can do is turn the grinder on, turn it off again, so it's going kind of slow, and then use that when you're honing the edges of it. So like I say, I mean, that's the whole thing with the tools. You'll notice, here's another one. I've even just taken like square bar steel that you can get at Home Depot and cut it and made tools out of it. It's surprising how you don't have to have, like a high-speed steel for this kind of stuff. You're just not working at it the same level as when you're doing large-scale items. All right. Anybody want to see some actual turning? If you have questions, yell out. Okay.
Make sure we take them.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you make these little baby tools, are you modeling them after like big tools, or do you just kind of know what shape you need based on your experience, or?
Yes. A combination of all. So a combination of all of the above. A lot of it is, if you've ever seen Johannes Mikkelsen demonstrate, he's the guy that does the cowboy hats. If you ever get the opportunity, you want to watch his demo. Because the whole time that guy is turning, his mind's going on how could I make this easier and better. So he has invented some of the coolest tools out there because, he's sitting in a barn out in Vermont turning these hats. And he's thinking about how can I make sharpening easier and faster? How can I, and it's the same thing with me. The whole time I'm turning, I'm thinking, how can I do this better? So I'm constantly trying to think what would work better next time, stuff like that. So I may not have gotten it right yet, but I'm constantly working on it. So you'll see. Let me, did I get my light back? All right, so here's where I get the church dirty. So now it's time I want to turn this thing round. So like I said, I can use a spindle roughing gouge. Well, I got to figure out how to operate this. And at the moment I'm at 2,800 RPM. My lathe doesn't have one of those fancy gauges, so it's like, it's going about that fast. I don't know. And again, I could do this kind of stuff. Personally, I'm not really a fan of using a roughing gouge. I would rather do more like this. As you can see, when I'm using a roughing gouge, I'm kind of taking a beating, right? The piece is coming around and it's slamming down against this edge. If I'm using a gouge and I'm coming in this way, I'm actually cutting the wood. I feel like I have more control. And if I stop it, it's a nice smooth finish right off the, right from the very beginning. By the way, another point, one of the hardest parts is getting in close. So one of the things I've done is you can make your own tool rest. I don't tend to use this. I tend to use the bigger ones, but just to show. Give myself a little more room. You can't get close enough. I always find that, the smaller the tools, the smaller the item, you want to be as close as you can get. So you want to try and do anything you can to help you in that regard. So, and again, notice how I'm holding my tool. I'm not back here on the handle. I tend to get right up close So let's say we want to turn a bowl. So one of the first things I want to make sure of is I still had a flat here, so I want to make sure I got past that, so I did. Oh. The other thing about, I mentioned I kind of skipped over the intro part. The reason why is pretty much anything I'm going to tell you is in this. And I believe you guys should have a copy of this in the library. And if not, there's no reason why you can't. So in 2016, I wrote a series of articles on turning miniatures that was published in the Wood Turning Fundamentals, which is the electronic magazine that the AEW puts out. So there were 4 different articles that got published in there. At the end of the year, they did a special edition book that has all 4 of my articles in it. In addition, there are some articles in here by Cindy Drozda and a few other, let's see, Keith Tompkins, Bill Smith, Jim Schofel, Donna Vils Banfield. But like I say, this is something that can be downloaded, and I think I emailed you a copy of it. So it's something that you have for free that can be printed and thrown in the library and distributed. I don't care. But you should be able to download it right off the AEW website as well. And again, let's start in the middle over here this time. Pass it around. So like I said, all of this information's in there in gory details, so I can get away with skipping over a lot of it. How am I doing time-wise? Okay. So, the philosophy for turning isn't much different than when you're turning a large-scale item. You don't want to go too far because you don't want to risk making the structure that's holding the wood too weak. So you want to go far enough that you can establish what the shape is, and then you could go to the hollowing part. So I'm going to switch back to the good. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Is that what you mean by offset turning?
Apparently. So I am kind of curious why. Oh, I see why. Yeah. Remember I started to take it off and then change my mind? That's why. Okay. True that up a little bit. All right, get some of this junk out of the way. This is what I was talking about. You want the bed extension for that Nova. So nice to be able to do that. So I'm going to get rid of this thing. Switch back to this one just because I like it better. So you have choices. Oop, I'm not going to be able to use that because of this tool rest height. Somewhere, I guess I can use this guy. All right, I'll try using this one. So, if you were turning a real bowl, you would use a bowl gouge and you would do this kind of stuff. And as you can see, it still works. right, I'll make another cut with it. Okay. Or we can use these kind of tools. By the way, I've got a bunch of different toys here for showing variations. You'll notice I'm not using any kind of magnifying glass. I find if you have enough light, you don't need it. I have a couple of things here. What's that? I'm close. I'm close. But yeah, I did break down yesterday and ordered a set of magnifying lenses, but I've never used them before. We'll see if I like them or not. But are you able to get that with the camera?
Too small.
Hold on a second. I'm trying. There you go.
All right, so how deep am I? How thick is the wall? By the way, this isn't going to be a very, you know what? The beauty of this, start over. Okay. So the first time was just practice, right? Oh, I see why. So that was just practice. Now we'll do it for real. Where's the tool with the fancy handle? The, what's that? Oh, this is better. I like, this will work. That wasn't good. That's what I get for using a spindle gouge. So like I say, you can do that. Let me just check that, see if I've damaged it. Yeah, a little bit. Nah, I'll fix this one. All right, now, this tool could be a little sharper, by the way. So, that's where I was last time I got to this point. How do we know our dimensions on this? So depth, take something like this, and all it is a little piece of wood with a dowel through it. Ideally, you want a little bit of resistance, but it should be able to move fairly easily. Put it on like that, hold it like that, and sight across it, and I know what my depth is. Very simple. I use a similar thing for full-size bowls, but I have 2 dowels that go in it. So you sight the first one in, then you sight the second one in, and then when you look across it, you're looking across the pair of them. It gives you a more accurate reading. Wall thickness. We've all seen a micrometer. So the thing that's tricky on this, I took the wire and wrapped it around a small screwdriver to get that coil. And I marked on here, I can't see the monitor, so I don't know. This is my depth gauge here. So the wider open it is, the more lines you see. So what I do is just use it like that, and you can see right now, I don't know if you can see that, Ray, but I'm just about one line, which would be about 1/16 of an inch. It only works insofar because this part's in the way. This is something I stole from David Ellsworth in terms of ideas. You could do a similar thing with something like this. And what you do is you know the distance between points on your wire gauge. And then if you take, I'll be right back, a ruler like this, so you can measure and you can see this is, 4. If I hold it here and I'm at 3, then that tells me there's the 1/16, right? So that's a really easy way to work. And what's cool with this is you can go at it, you can flip the wire over to measure different types of shapes. So again, I use a big one of these, it's like this big, for when I'm turning other large size items. And it's pretty much free. All right, so we definitely have to go a little bit smaller on this. So this guy should do. It's not the one I wanted. I have tools all over the place here. There we go. Oh, you'll notice I use this a lot at home, but the board on the bottom doesn't fit in between the rails, so it's kind of clunky. So just a round nose scraper. Ray, I'm trying to keep my head out of the way. Now, what about sanding? So, the stuff I passed around, that little tiny black spindle that was in there, I started sanding that at 600 grit. Keep in mind when you're working this small, 150 grit, the little pebbles on there is bigger than the thickness of this wood. So you can't start at 150. So you tend to have to work like, most of the time I'll start around 400. What I do that makes this easy is I'll cut my papers into strips. So I've got 150, 220, 320, 400, 600. And this is really good when you're doing pens because you can just sit here and, you know, start at one grit, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one, and you don't have to fumble around looking for sandpaper. For something like this, like I said, I'm going to start at 400. I can easily just grab that piece. On something like this, for some reason, I always tend to work on the opposite side instead of this way. But I find that way I can see what I'm doing. For sanding the inside, you could take pieces of electrical wire, put double stick tape on it, and then wrap sandpaper around it. So like I have 320, 400 on one. I have, well, this one has 220 and 320, but I'll put the various grits on these different ones. And then when you're ready to hollow, you can just kind of do like that. Or not hollow sand, sorry. So that was 2, 3. I guess I should try to do a good job on this because you people are probably going to look at it closely. Oh, so what happens when the ends of this start to get kind of messed up and stuff? You just peel a little bit off and you've got more. What do you have? Yeah. This is 14 here. But yeah, I mean, it's not exact. You could also use something as simple as oh, here we go. So aquariums, you know, the tubing, you could do that. You know, it just needs to be stiff enough to give you something to press up against it. The wire, the biggest problem is it's too stiff and it could actually scratch it. So something like that, like I say, is a little more forgiving. I also use this, somewhere there's another end. When I'm doing hollowing, there you go. You know, to blow the dust out of the inside of it. All right, so like I say, you run through those things. The other thing, I'll be right back. Anybody else use Abralon pads? I love these things. What's really cool about them is, for one thing, they're very, very flexible. You can just kind of wad them up. And you just kind of go through the different grits with them. You can use these wet. If they start to get like gummed up, you can just wash them out. My favorite thing about them is they're Velcro backed. So if you have a power sander that has a Velcro disc on it, you just put these things on, it holds them perfectly, etc. Questions? Anybody wanting to turn miniatures now, or have I still not convinced you? Okay. So let's take a look at what we have. Not bad.
You finished that on the lathe, or you,
Pardon?
you finished that on the lathe?
We're heading there in a second. My nose keeps running. I apologize. So, normally I use Triple E, Ultrashine, whatever it is. Finish is always a tough thing. Lately I've been using, what is it, the Wood Doctor? I don't know, they sell it at Woodcraft. What's that?
Dr. Kirk,
That doesn't sound right. It's,
the guy who teaches the woodcraft.
oh, no, not Dr. Kirk. I know who you're talking about. No, this is, I forget. I don't know, but it's a friction polish. Okay. So just to be safe before I go too far, because I did change it, remember, I scraped it and all that. I'm going to part it off. Here we go. That wasn't mine. I didn't drop it. I didn't mention, I also use screwdrivers for a lot of things. Mainly they make really good parting tools. The other thing, you're closer. When I first got started wood turning, I went on Woodcraft and I saw this pyramid tool. And I thought, oh, that's awesome. And I paid like $35 for it. And after I got it, I thought, that's easy to make. Why am I buying stuff like that? Yeah, that's, a Phillips screwdriver that you just, sharpen on 3 sides. I use them a lot. All right, so now I'm going to part this thing off. All right, so our bottom's not very pretty, and it's grumble, grumble, complain. As you'll notice, I didn't really worry about finishing the outside yet because, we'll do that now. So if I was doing this at home, I would use my vacuum chuck for a large bowl, but vacuum chuck on this size is kind of tough. I'm still working on that. Once you have a vacuum chuck, it's hard to not use the vacuum chuck. Oh my, I'm way off. By the way, I haven't turned miniatures in like 10 years, so way out of practice. One of the problems with miniatures, you will lose more than you successfully complete. All right, much closer. What's that?
Can't leave a pile of sawdust in your feet.
Oh, and the worst, under my lathe is a big giant tub, like Tupperware tub. And when it gets full, I take it out in the woods and I dump it. I can lose full-size bowls in that. So you have a couple of options on this. One, and it's not the one I normally would use, but one, you could use a parting tool. I get carried away with that dial. By the way, the nice part about that tub, right now I would just drop this and it'll stick down in there and the handle's still sticking up. So close. You guys are way too quiet. I can't tell if you're asleep or bored or playing video games. You know, nowadays with cell phones, you never know with the audience. Okay, so we're getting there. Close. Let's try that. See if I'm... I have a big wheel on mine. You can see I'm always grabbing for it here. That'll be close enough. So, razor blade knife? Oh, here it is. Trying to do this without cutting yourself. See why you need the long...
I'll get one for you next time.
No, this is long enough. I'm just... Yeah, and I'm going to grab the scissors, trim this a bit. That would involve thinking. Whatever. All right, so let's just do something like this. I buy this at the woodworking show, and I wish I could tell you which vendor. I guess it's Peachtree. It's 1 inch by whatever, and it costs like $7, and it's amazing.
Spec tape by Woodcraft. Theirs is really good.
Yeah, but if it's from Woodcraft, then it's $20.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's...
So one of my favorite tapes,
Is it double-sided tape?
yeah, you can buy this. I know at Ace Hardware, probably at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's carpet tape. This stuff is really good. All right, so what I want to do, obviously, is peel off this stuff. And just so you know, this goes so much faster at home. It's funny how when you have people watching you, you become conscious of how long these stupid things take. The other thing is at home, I just throw it on the floor. All right, so the idea is to make a jam chuck. Now, if I'd made a really good fit on that, it would work a little bit better. I'll just have to be a little bit careful on this one. But now my intent is to finish shaping this guy. Yeah, it's not very round. Yep, that didn't work. As you can see, it's not easy to bring the tailstock up to hold it. So the problem with this is it's not a very good fit. And it's not going to work that way. I'm going to have to make it better fit. Yeah, the problem with putting more tape on it is the more tape just makes it looser. You know, like it has too much give. Now the dust is getting to me. The problem with jam chucks is they're always hit or miss. Sometimes you get lucky and you hit it on the first try, but never when you have 40 people sitting watching you. Next time I do this at home and it works on the first try, I'm going to turn around and say, where are you guys? Come on.
Didn't happen.
All right. We're going to work with this. It's going to happen. It's just going to be perfect. That's all there is to it. So much for that theory. Yeah, it's not going to work. All right. You get the idea. So the other thing you can do. Yep, you just kind of shave it away. But, oh well.
So is it not working? The jam check is just the wrong size, the wrong shape?
Yeah, so the problem is you want the shape of the dome to match the shape of the bowl, right? And you want it to be just loose enough to allow for the tape. So that's that balance. Yeah, that one. That's one I found in my thing here, so I must have made that the other day. On the other hand, let's look at, real fast, I'll do like a vase type thing. I really wish that went down just a little bit. Oh well. Can't complain about you guys because it's my tool rest. All right. So now for the hollowing. You could cheat, and you could take a drill bit and, drill out the main part with a drill bit. Here's another interesting part with this. If I was making a vase full size with this, you got to sand the inside because people are going to stick their fingers in there, right? We don't have to worry about that today. However, when you're making this kind of stuff, think about that. You don't necessarily have to hollow it all the way out. You're the only one who will ever know. I tend to get carried away with it. All right, so how do I know how deep to go, etc.? I can't use a laser like I would do on my big stuff. So what I have to do is kind of use my own judgment with this. So I know that, I don't know how much you're seeing with this, But what I'll do is I'll lay it on top of it and I'll get a sense for what the inside shape is. And when I go in, I'll put a piece of tape on here. This shows me my maximum depth. Okay? So now, so the one thing you can be absolutely positive on with this, you're never really sure exactly how thick it is and all that as you're shaping it, but you will know you went too far when it comes out the side. That's the only thing that you could always be positive on. All right. I am not going to go overly crazy on this because I'm basically just trying to give you the idea. So like I say, you can use the various shaped tools with this. So instead of having one that goes like a really hard turn, I might part way, and you'll notice I have them in different sizes and shapes. And then, I can work my way in with the different tools and I can get more and more. That one I sent around that's got the big hook on it is useful for getting in, like where you have a big shoulder. But again, I haven't met anybody yet that's sticking their fingers in there. Even weight isn't a good judge on this. So one of the things I use, and I had one around here somewhere and I lost it, is I'll take sandpaper and I'll roll it up into a cone. So now I can stick that in there to sand it. And depending upon how tight I make it, and it's kind of neat because it conforms to the shape. So I just did that at 600 grit. Yeah. This is the one I said I got from Avelina Samuels, or what's his name? I think it's Avelina Samuels. Yeah. But yeah, again, the ones I passed around here, I mean, I think it's Avelina. But yeah, like I said, you could use almost any 1/4-inch gouge and then do it like this. You'll notice ever since I got Cindy's gouge, I've kind of stolen her grind. And all my gouges nowadays, I tend to kind of follow that. It's a great grind. And I mean, even here, you don't want a sharp edge here, because as you're trying to make sharp turns, that'll scrape and put creases in the items. So getting that off of there is a good thing. And like I say, it works very well. So, let's... With what? Oh yeah, they're all over there. Yeah, the thing you have to be careful with acrylics is they don't handle heat well. they'll start melting and like reshaping themselves on you. Some acrylics cut better than others. I was telling Ray earlier, I will never turn plexiglass again. Plexiglass cuts like tempered glass. I had to wear gloves. I had a full face shield on. I had like tape around my, because when it's coming off and it hits you, it cuts you. Part that makes me mad is I turned a Christmas ornament out of it, and I have no idea where that ornament is. So all that work, it came out really cool, but I lost it. All right, I'm not going crazy on the shape on this. It's just the general idea. You can use these things for sanding it. You can go back to my, here it is. These things. And again, what I love about this stuff is you just kind of bend it. And keep in mind for the fine detail, sandpaper can be very aggressive. And you could ruin your detail or you could refine the detail. Just depending on how you use it. But yeah, when you're working this small, 400 grit is coarse. Oh, I bought these size discs. They're Velcro backed, and they come, I think, 60 grit through 10,000 grit. And I bought a big assortment of them. I don't even know how many off Amazon for like $10. And I use them constantly now. They're great. They're a nice size. I use them for my large scale turning as well as a small scale. But anyway, yes, usually I do. I just didn't bring it today. Triple E is one of the best mistake hiders out there. It will fill in the little tiny scratches and stuff. They claim that if you sand to 400, it'll take it to 800. If you sand to 4,000, it takes it to 8,000. It really does help a lot. All right.
The newer versions, the Yorkshire grit or Act,
The what?
Yorkshire grit,
Haven't heard of that.
very similar to Triple E.
Really?
Better in my opinion.
Huh. So whenever you have like details like that, you're better off pouring a little bit of it on and then turning it in rather than trying to put it on your cloth and do it. So for this, you're once again presented with either, take a gouge and do it that way, or once again, the reverse chuck or jam chuck thing. And what I usually do with stuff like this is I'll find a piece of dowel that's the right size to fit in there. You could also use a drill bit, put it on there, mount it into a Jacobs chuck, and then the drill bit works really cool, but I'd keep the speed down because it kind of bites into it and keeps it from spinning. But if you're not careful, you could easily go through the bottom of it. Yep, great shot. All right, more importantly, what I wanted to do. Again, how are we doing time-wise? I don't want to. Okay. If I don't talk much, I can go pretty quick on this. Somebody keeps cluttering my bed of my lathe. Keep putting stuff on there and they're not cleaning it up. Questions? Oops. I know, it's kind of unnerving. They all just know that I'm from Maryland, and Maryland people are more polite.
That's why I know you want to crafts.
Yeah, but they would be like this big. All right, so what I'm going to do, and I'll give it a minute or so. So I'm going to turn two things here. I want to turn you a cowboy hat, and like I said, I'm going to do it really quick. But to get to the cowboy hat, I want the hat this way so that I can do the rim and hollow it out. So that means I got to take off this top half and essentially throw it away. So rather than do that, I'm going to make a natural edge bowl. Hopefully that's dried enough. I'll find out. Good. All right. So, yeah, I got super glue on my arm. This'll do. So what I want to do is mark my center because I want to get the pith out of there. Now, see if I can demonstrate this. You can use light with the natural edge stuff. Can you see? Let's see, right. Yeah, I don't know. But you can actually use the color to tell you how thick it is. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you're... Yeah. With this, because it's so small, you really don't have a hard time judging it. Yeah. I cut this last night and put it in a Ziploc bag to keep it as moist as possible. All right, I'm not going to, I thought that way. I'm not going to waste time trying to sand it and put the finish on it, because this ultimately is where I was headed. I cut it off a branch in my backyard that was in a mass tangle. I have no idea. It might be poisonous for all I know. This cowboy hat that you guys passed around is the same wood. So, Ron? It might even be a vine. We have these crazy vines that grow, and it's just like, you know, curved and twisted around. Okay. All right, so this is going to be my rim. Do I look like Ashley Harwood yet? Anybody who's ever watched her demo knows what I'm talking about. She always wears these beautiful sweaters, and by the time she's done, she's completely covered. Well, normally I would always use dry wood, but for cowboy hats, in order to get them to bend, you have to use green wood. What's that? You'll see. Nah, that's no surprise. All right, our cowboy hat's turned. So now, normally, I would do silly stuff like sand it and things like that. I'm going to clean this up just a hair. So now, same concept. I'm going to get a bath again. Hopefully I didn't go too far. I think I did. Okay. And now you can do a better job dressing this up. Oop. Probably better at a little bit slower speed. You can also thin the brim a little bit if you need to. Sure. The one other thing here. If you want to color the brim, this isn't the pen I normally would use. Use a really fine point, like artist type thing. Okay, so now, I'll bring it back over there. What I do is take a block like this, and I end up making one for pretty much all of them, because you want to take, oh, there it is. Unless you take the time and measure this to get the right size hole, you know, like you could know the size of your hole and make the rim to fit it, or you could just make one, it only takes like 5 minutes to make it. So you put this guy in here, and then you put, make sure you line the grain up. You gotta have it like that, right? So this would be flush. And then you put a couple of rubber bands around it. Not too much, because you'll crack it. Let it go for an hour or so. Put a couple more rubber bands on it. Let it go a little bit longer. Put a couple more on. And little by little, you'll see it getting like that. And you just leave the rubber bands on overnight. Take it off and it's curved.
You have to find sometimes you have to spray it with water to get it on the belt.
Well, again, this was just cut,
Yes.
so that's not going to do it. Yeah, I find that it's easier to just turn the new one.
I think you're stepping on the microphone.
Maybe. Now it's behind me. Yeah, I don't like this microphone. I think we're kind of out of time. Any questions?